Welcome, welcome, welcome. You listen to the Ask Brien radio show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM. Well, each week, every Thursday, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, or wherever you're located, we have a great show, and we discuss business. But everybody asks us the question, why is it called Ask Brien, since my name is not Brien? People don't know that. And why are you spelling Brien B-R-I-E-N when most people spell their name B-R-I-A-N or B-R-Y-A-N? So each week we go through, in case you have never listened to the show before, we try to explain to you why we have an E in Ask Brien. And we have an expert on E's. And is she around, Tracy?
Yes, I am here. In an excellent mood, I might say.
Well, that's an E right there.
Yes, it is. And you are an egghead for being so smart about that.
Well, thank you.
Okay, so let's get on to the real E's. So one of the reasons why we like to focus on the E's is because we are all about educating entrepreneurs. Did you see what I did there? Bundling two in one sentence.
Actually, isn't that E squared?
Yes, and I just made it E cubed because I said efficient afterwards. So you got to stay real sharp to keep up with me now.
Well, I don't know if that was efficient by combining it, because sometimes it's easier when people hear each one on its own as opposed to throwing it all into one sentence and they get all confused what it's all about.
Well, that is true, and especially with the word expert, which we really like to have it stand on its own, because our experts stand on their own. They are experts in their industry, and we even have a formula of what qualifies them to be an expert on the Ask Brien show.
And it's not E equals MC squared?
It is not E equals MC squared.
E stands for energy, no?
That was it.
Doesn't E stand for energy?
I wish that was it. It does. And energy we are all about the good energy. However, the formula, it would be so much easier if it was E equals MC squared. But we'll dive into the real formula, which is most experts have an average of 10,000 hours or more in their industry or their area of expertise. And that is typically, and I use the word typically emphatically, because it is typically calculated based on 40 hours a week, 50 so weeks a year over the course of 5 years. But you and I, as we always discuss and never leave out, most entrepreneurs haven't seen a 40-hour work week since they left their corporate gig. So they are investing way more time, way faster, and getting up to that 10,000 hours, probably closer to like a 3-year window of time if we had to really, do that math consistently. But yes, that is our formula, and it has turned out to be very accurate for the experts we've had on the show.
Well, today's guest, not only does he qualify, I'm sure, as an entrepreneur doing that, but as his original profession of being an ER doctor, I'm sure he had probably that many hours in the first week. I mean, if there were that many hours in a week.
Yes, not because goodness knows the amount of hours spent in undergrad, graduate, medical school, and
I was referring to residency, but yeah.
Residency, yes. I called it apprenticeship. I knew that was not the right word. But yes, absolutely. And then getting into specialty niche as well. So yes, definitely more than 10,000 hours, no doubt about it. And you know what else is really important to the success of an entrepreneur in E that we like a lot? You mentioned energy, but you have a word that you really like a lot that has to do with enthusiasm.
And excitement!
Woo! Woo! Yeah.
I have to interrupt, though, because the biggest E has been left out, and our engineer started to cry. I could see the tears coming down.
Just a little bit.
Andrew?
I'm doing great.
Even though she didn't say anything about the engineer that runs the show?
Again, she forgets me every time.
No, I was saving the best for last.
Oh, best for last. There it is.
I'll remember that when we do talk about Grease Lightning.
Well, I was saving our collective That's the last. No, okay. We could not be doing the show without our superstar engineer. Thank you, Andrew, very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Because why? You want to know why? Because you are electrifying.
Thank you there, Andrew.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, without further what?
Well, hold on. I'm sorry, but not only did you save that to last, but you didn't. Our lead word has always been, and you always even attack me for this, is don't you empathize?
Oh gosh, why is it that I always leave that one out?
That's too much of a softball for me. You don't want me to give me a fat pitch like that.
Okay, well, we express a lot of empathy on the show, even if it doesn't sound like it. All right, let's get into our guest because we have such a great topic today and such a great guest. So I would say without further
ado,
ADIEU, and it's your favorite word because
it has all vowels except for one consonant, and there is an E in it.
And there is an E in it, which is excellent. Okay, awesome. Let's get on with this thing.
All right, well, I don't know if you go by the word doctor or your first name, so I'm going to ask you, how do you want me to address you?
Brien, you can call me Dr. Greg. That'll keep everyone straight. And I just got to say, this has been really enjoyable so far.
Another E?
And exceptional.
Appreciate that. I appreciate you getting actively involved.
As long as we didn't send you to the ER, I guess we're doing okay.
Well, even ER has an E in it. But we're going to try to avoid emergency situations here, like the mics going off, the engineer leaving town, whatever, something like that. So, Dr. Greg, so first of all, people don't know, obviously they know you about your profession, but let's go a little bit about your background. So you were a doctor for how many years?
Yeah, so I practiced emergency medicine for 15 years. And Tracy's exactly right. It was serial 10,000-hour expertise cycles, and there were multiples of them. And to your point, they were compressed into a pretty short time period.
Well, that's how you gain experience, another E. But, right? Now, you were practicing in an ER situation or in your own practice after you became a doctor?
Yeah, Brien. So trained in the UCLA system in emergency medicine after attending medical school, trained 3 to 4 years in emergency medicine at UCLA, and then after that went into private practice, and we had contracts with hospitals to provide emergency services. So both practice as a physician, and then over time, led the practice, was a managing partner, onto hospital leadership. So really worked my way through the system and built up a ton of experience throughout really the inpatient side of care and the emergency medicine side of care before I took off on my entrepreneurial journey.
So I don't want to spend too much time on the medical part in a sense, but I want to understand. When you became a managing person in the medical practice, did you have to reduce significantly the amount of time you were practicing medicine to spend more time on the management marketing side, or was it you still did the same level of medical working and then just added on the management on top of that?
Well, it's medicine, so the answer is yes, kept that full time and then just added more hours on top, and that's how medical training was. I think medical training has evolved, thank God, over the last decade or so, where the hours are more humane. But in terms of running a practice, leading a practice, that work was added on top of really the same clinical load that my partners would have, and that was just understood. And it was worth it because really enjoyed both aspects of practice and then the management side as well.
So normally I would go through more history here, but we do want to get really into the show. So the first question is, what is the name of your current company that you're working on, that you're a founder?
Yeah, Brian. So the name of my current company is Clinexus. CLINNEXUS. Think Nexus.
And how long has that been around?
So Clinexus has been around for 3 years now, founded 3 years ago, and operational over the last 2 years.
And what do they do?
So I'll keep it simple. This is part of being an entrepreneur in healthcare, especially if you're a physician, is to try and learn how to explain healthcare concepts, which can be really complex, in simple ways. So simply, we address the broken handoffs in healthcare, meaning patients come out of the hospital, that period right after the hospital and before they're really engaged with their primary care doctor is a really fraught and dangerous time for patients. It's when they're the most vulnerable. So we step in with a remote solution. We partner with primary care practices, the hospital, and we provide coordination services for patients so that they can, get transportation to and from their primary care appointments, make sure they have their medications, make sure that they have family support. So we're really closing that huge gap, one could call it a chasm, between a hospital stay and getting them back under the direct care of their primary care doctor.
So this does not include or doesn't include rehab? Because sometimes people go to the hospital and then they have to go to a rehab unit for 60, 90 days or 30 days. Is it rehab or rehab's not included?
It's both, right? It's both. So we could go much deeper, but it's it's a post-hospital time period. But it could be also a patient coming out of longer-term rehab, like a skilled nursing facility, or any environment where they're having intensive care, and then they're going to be leaving that environment. We're there to make sure that they have all the resources and all the support they need to be successful.
And are you the only founder, or are there other founders in the company?
I'm a co-founder. So there's another founder, Dr. Kevin Fickenshire, who's really a visionary in primary care, did a lot of work in rural health and communities that don't have a lot of support and resources like the ones that we're providing. So between my emergency medicine practice and Dr. Fickenshire's experience around primary care and seeing those gaps, that's how we came up with Clinexus. And
what were you doing right before you started Clinex?
Well, I'm a serial entrepreneur, so 15 years ago, I felt like I learned enough as an emergency physician, Brian, to really understand how healthcare was broken and really firsthand, working in the emergency room at 2 a.m, you'll learn a lot about what's not working. And so I had a list. Of problems that I wanted to go out and solve beyond the four walls of the hospital, and so I did that. Before this company was involved, and we built a digital platform, so basically providing services through your phone for people going through recovery or people trying to stop using opiates or other drugs like that. And so, the theme being providing access to care and really helping people when they're the most vulnerable. So that was the previous company before Clinexus, but a lot of the same themes around creating access for people that are generally being underserved.
And do you deal specifically with consumers or insurance companies or multi-level practices?
Yeah, it's a good question. So our customer, large primary care networks have been our initial customer and our focus. But over time, we also provide a lot of value for payers. Insurance companies, Medicare, Medicaid, those companies that pay for services, they also place a high premium or place a lot of value in that period when people come out of hospitals. That's an area of huge cost for payers, and so our services are valued by them. So they're also a customer.
So the question I have is, what was the biggest challenge in starting this business?
I think Brian, in healthcare especially, I think for any entrepreneur, there's a lot of ideas out there, and there are a lot of great ideas, right? And there are a lot of great ideas that will work well in a business context, right? You'll be able to impact improve quality of people's lives, generate revenue and make money. But I'll tell you, one of the biggest challenges for an entrepreneur is taking that oftentimes very complex models or ideas and distilling it down into language that an investor, especially investor, if you're starting a company, you need capital. And yeah, you can self-fund or bootstrap, but when you want to go and scale something really large and impactful, when you're ready to do that, you've got to be able to articulate that in very simple terms to an investor. And I'll be honest with you, that's one of probably the biggest obstacles for an entrepreneur, especially in the healthcare world, which is, as you know, the U.S. healthcare system is so complex, so fragmented, so disconnected, that a lot of the times if you're explaining your product or what you're working to do, one of the biggest obstacles is just telling the story. And so you really got to work on your story, and that's probably the first thing you need to be able to do.
So your story, you're referring to the pitch, is that correct?
Yeah, I think, you could say the pitch, and that you could be pitching investors and being able to take, again, complex subject and distill it down into something that's simple.
So how did you find your first customer?
Well, I think it gets back to, being in healthcare myself, being a physician. So as a physician, you have some credibility out of the gate in the clinical world. And then, also having built serially healthcare startups and healthcare companies that are all operational, profitable, some getting quite large, you build up a network. And so thankfully, we on our team, we're no more than 1 or 2 degrees of separation from any health system, any payer, and so we can get in and get those introductions. We found a fantastic anchor partner for this company in Central California, the largest market in the country, 4th largest economy in the world. So we've been really focused in California, and that's where we found our first customer.
Now, are there any scalable issues in the sense of the medical laws? Because I know the laws are different from state to state. So did you have to deal with any legal issues going from California to other states? I mean, is there a separate insurance carrier in each state and various things by state? How did that affect you?
Yeah, Brian, such a great question. I would just say there are always those barriers in healthcare going state to state. Because, for example, and not to get too technical for the group, but I know you're a lawyer, so you'll understand this. One is the corporate practice of medicine. And there's huge variance in terms of how that's interpreted from state to state. So if you're practicing, if someone's practicing, it's not as much of an issue for this company, but certainly other experiences I've had. If you're practicing in California and Florida, you're going to have a huge difference in terms of how they interpret how you practice and what's legal in terms of delivering services in healthcare. The other issue is thinking of your employment law, right? So for us, we're a remote solution. So we might have a care coordinator who lives in Florida who is supporting a patient and a doctor in California. So we've got to adjust for not only the corporate practice of medicine, but we also have to factor in any labor laws connected to that person who may be working out of Florida or they may be working out of California. So again, that adds on to the complexity of doing business in healthcare.
We only have about another minute before we take a break, but I wanted to go, as an entrepreneur, and we're dealing with medicine, I mean, can you apply standard entrepreneur practices to the medical field since it is a regulated area?
Yeah, you just have to be very mindful. I think I know we have a short time right now, but I would just say if you get out of bed and you're building companies that improve outcomes that matter to patients, right? Keep them out of the hospital, help them avoid the emergency department, quality of life, and you do that and you control costs and are mindful of costs. If you use that as your North Star, you'll generally be pretty successful in navigating the complexities.
So we only have a few seconds left, so we're gonna come off and take a break. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Ask Brien Radio Show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to the Ask Brien Radio Show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM. Like no other station in the world. I don't know why it is.
All right, so we're back, and something that I noticed when I was meeting you for you to come on the show as a guest is that not only are you an MD, Dr. Greg, but you also have an MBA, which I find to be very impressive, but also probably pretty uncommon. Would I be correct in that assumption?
Well, I think it's becoming more common for some of the reasons we've already discussed, and that's physicians realizing that they just were underprepared to be successful on the business side of healthcare, and they wanted to be, they wanted to master their own destiny, and for a lot of physicians, they just don't have the tools to do that, and so we're seeing more and more physicians getting, studying it for an MBA. We're seeing now more combined MD, MBA programs where you can get an MBA while you're getting your MD. I don't know if I would have been able to do that. That would have been a lot of work at the time. But for me, it was doing that after I'd gone out into the business world, and I just realized, I need to add some more tools to my belt.
Well, that was one of the questions that I wanted you to dig a little deeper in if you're comfortable with, and that is the timing, because, to your point, that's a lot of school to do all that at one time. I mean, I think that would literally, your mind would, implode. But at the same time, I'm curious, was it always part of your long-term trajectory to go through medical school, practice medicine, and then ultimately do an entrepreneurial path with an MBA, or do you feel like it was a direct result of all the changes that have happened in the healthcare arena?
I think it was the latter. I mean, I trained probably a generation or so ago, and at the time, not a lot of physicians were pursuing MBAs. Not a lot of physicians were really thinking about life beyond, direct clinical practice. So it wasn't even necessarily something I'd contemplated until I'd worked my way through emergency department leadership and hospital leadership, and I felt like I'd accomplished everything I wanted to accomplish in that. And then as I waded out into more of the business world or the business side of healthcare, for me, it was I really needed to add on some more tools onto the belt. So that process, it was probably 2 or 3 years after I'd started my first company in healthcare that as we scaled that up and started, talking to investors and talking to people that knew a whole lot more about finance than I did, that I knew that I needed to have some more expertise behind so that I could be successful negotiating and doing a lot of the things that you need to do to really be, I had the clinical piece down, could understand the problems in healthcare, but the financial side ultimately was the big part that I knew that I needed to address.
Yes, well, and I think it just makes you so much more balanced as both a doctor and an entrepreneur. There's no doubt about that. It was worth the time, energy, resources, and commitment that you made in that way. So I want to, again, pivot just a bit from that, because what you're saying, both the pathway of being a doctor, the pathway of being a business owner, no matter how much school you have, there's still the tactical, practical things that you have to learn in the practice, right?
Yes.
And one of those things that can come difficult for some, easy for others, is leadership. So that's something, really good leadership skills are something that they can't teach you as you're getting your MBA. So a question I have for you is, what are some of the challenges that you faced in leading a team, and what have maybe even have been some of the rewards that you've experienced doing that?
Oh, Tracy, that's such a great question. There's a book. It's a bit dated now, and certainly I don't know that it would be a book that a lot of people would read. But there was a book called The House of God that came out decades ago, and it was it's pretty funny now, but there's some reality to it, and that is oftentimes physicians, MDs especially, can build up a bit of an ego in terms of the world. Now, thankfully, a lot of that has become less so, but a lot of ego around going to medical school, residency, and being told, quote unquote, how smart you are, and having really as much much impact around patient care and hospital, running of hospitals, administration stuff. So, but what you quickly learn when you move out of that environment and you go to maybe start your own business, start a new venture, and start to lead teams that don't come out of that structural element of medicine, you learn that ego doesn't necessarily serve you well. And I think there's a transition I went through, and I think there's a transition that a lot of physicians go through where you need to transition into being ideally more of a servant leader, practicing humility. One of the E words you called out earlier, empathy. Elements that maybe not necessarily a lot of physicians have developed in their career, but once you move out into the world of entrepreneurship, running your own business, leading people, that's probably one of the biggest predictors of your success, which ultimately, emotional intelligence and those elements are often a huge transition point, but absolutely critical in being successful.
And when you're, and I love that book has been such a great resource. There's definitely a couple oldies but goodies. I'm a huge Stephen Covey fan myself, and yes. I literally believe that the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, no matter the fact that it's probably ancient at this point in time, considering publication date, it's still one of the best evergreen books that you can fall back to learn about running and managing a business or a team. And you seem to have an amazing team. So we have just a minute or so before our break, but I wanted to, maybe the first question, and we'll come back after our break and follow up with this, but my first question is, when did you know it was time to start adding to your team? I think that's a big challenge a lot of entrepreneurs face. They seem to do a lot of things themselves and have a chicken and egg syndrome about when to add people to their team. So when did you know that you needed to build out a team?
Yeah, I think to be successful as an entrepreneur, you need to understand when to pull that value into your organization, right? If you bring in an engineer or a product lead early on, at $150,000 a year, or God, in California more than that, you can doom your business. So you really have to understand what is the most valuable piece that you need to pull in to move the business forward. And then you need to understand the levers of compensation. I don't want to go deep into this, but the levers of compensation. Do you give them equity? Is it take-home pay? Is it benefits? And early in a startup, you may only have equity, so you've got to be very judicious in thinking about who you bring into the organization to make the most impact and drive the most value for where you are.
So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back listening to our KHTS 1220 98.1 FM with our sponsor. Steph, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Hi, how are you guys?
We're great, and we're so happy that you're going to teach us how to make eggplant parmesan. Oh, sorry. Wrong.
Are you guys coming over?
We are now. We are now.
I'm coming over.
Although the doc may say that's a
you're
little bit
more than welcome.
I think the doc may say a little bit too much cholesterol in that eggplant parmesan. But anyway,
we can all take a walk.
As long as I'm invited, it's healthy.
All right.
Yes, the doctor's coming. Yes, if the doctor says it's healthy, it's healthy. We're coming.
But getting to our sponsorship, now, so there's 2 sponsors for our show. One is Albany Farms, and people don't know what that is. They think it's some farmland in Albany, and they don't know if it's Albany, Georgia, or Albany, New York, or Albany in a different state. So can you explain what Albany Farms is all about?
Yeah, certainly. So Albany Farms, it's not located in Georgia or New York, and it's not a farm. We are a food manufacturer located in Belfast, South Dakota, and our primary product right now is fried instant ramen noodles.
Well, let's not get into the fried part, but go ahead. The doctor.
So, our product is typically presented in 2 different presentations. We have the cup, which most college kids are accustomed to. It's, microwave safe, easy to make. And then we have the other presentation, which is a cake, which requires a little bit more preparation. You have to boil the water on the stove and do things that way. And what's great is that we have a lot of local supporters like MJ's Market, where we can be found locally. But if you don't live in Belfast, South Dakota, you can find us in U.S. Target as well as H-E-B. And if you're located in Canada, you can find us in Canada Walmarts up there.
Wow, that's fabulous. That's fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other company that's sponsoring our show is called Legal Steps, and people don't understand, first of all, why it's spelled with a Z, but after listening to the show, Brien spelled with an E, Legal Steps spelled with a Z. Obviously, somebody doesn't know how to spell. But what is Legal Steps all about?
Yeah, Legal Steps is a great do-it-yourself system to handle legal issues like forming a business in California or even registering a federal trademark. It saves you tons of money, which is important these days, and ultimately it gives you the resources that you need for you to feel empowered and confident to navigate these things. So it's spelled with a Z because it covers everything from A to Z, so that's why.
Well, that sounds great. Thanks a lot, Steph. Until next week, we appreciate all that help. And, I guess since you didn't do the eggplant parmesan this week, it'll be next week.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Thanks a lot. And I was actually... Thanks a lot. And I was actually talking to Dr. Irwin saying, how Legal Steps is so valuable in the sense that you could actually, as an entrepreneur... one of the first things you need to do when you're starting up is you want to probably form a corporation or an LLC to protect yourself from liability and not become personally liable. And I was just talking to the doctor earlier today about, wow, it would be great to have had that concept when we were starting out. What do you think about that?
Yeah, indeed. I think it's underestimated. That corporate governance, building that legal foundation for your startup is so critical, and I think a lot of people will get deep into, for example, a co-founder relationship, and they didn't do that work on the front end, that legal work on the front end, and that just compounds issues over time. So absolutely, can't do that work early enough.
Well, thanks a lot. And Tracy, you had some more questions?
Yeah, so we were, right before the break, we were talking about leadership and some really great resources, actually, on learning more about leadership. But you've gotten a lot of practice at it now. You have scaled your team. Can you walk us through some of the key positions on your team and how they add value not only to the business but to your bottom line?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for our company, we're a lot of, probably the most important element of what we do, well, certainly there's the patient-facing piece, which is number one, right? And that is bringing on frontline care coordinators, the individuals that are going to be touching families, patients directly. That's a critical piece. And hiring people that, a lot of the stuff we've already discussed, hiring people that have the certification, they have the qualifications, but do they also have the empathy? Can they communicate? Are they patient? Are they emotionally intelligent? Because invariably you're going to be dealing with people when they're very vulnerable, very scared, and so you got to recruit and hire team members that can really connect with and understand those individuals. So that's a critical element of what you're building. On the more management side of things, for us as a co-founder and CEO, depends on what time of day you might talk to me, I would be wearing a different hat, right? So I might be working on a pitch deck for an investor, and then I might be, working on running payroll. You do a lot of that yourself, but then you're right. Then you need to start building and developing your team. For us, it was critical that we had a lot of what we do in our business is the transfer and exchange of information in healthcare. So for us, we needed to bring in an information officer, a CIO, that could really help us manage information, manage data, but also do it in a compliant manner, right? Because people's health records are so critical and need to be protected with the utmost care. So making that investment in an informatics lead, critical for us. And then also some of the nursing leadership for our company, we realized that, going from organization to organization in terms of our partnerships, we needed nursing leadership that could speak the language of our partners and make sure that as we rolled the business out with a partner, that we had clinical folks that could speak the language, and that we had an informatics lead that could also speak the language of both IT and informatics with our partners. So those were some decision points for me as the CEO of the company that I needed to make. And then in terms of the sequencing and the timing, there's a lot of complexity there, but again, it really gets back to maximizing value on that investment in personnel.
Well, that is so inspiring just to know that you've got such a solid amount of people behind you moving you forward in the right direction. Of course, no one can do that, and you can't move forward without people knowing about you. So between now and the break, and we might have to start on this and then come back, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about your marketing strategy, because you've got all of those other amazing elements in place, the right people on the bus, the right bus, you're driving the bus, but unless people can find you and you can get customers, that becomes a challenge to generate revenue. So tell us a little bit about your marketing strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it really starts, it goes back to our go-to-market strategy, and for us it has been go into an area that we identified has the most need. So for us, Central California is an area where it's been historically under-resourced. And so go into an area where there's that need, and ideally identify that anchor customer. I think people get ahead of themselves when they start a business. Airbnb started as two guys with one apartment. And they scaled that up slowly. And I think a lot of people think that you need to build a hugely scalable business right out of the gate, and it's really not the case. Ideally, find that one customer that you can just go to school and understand them. But also, you build up credibility with them, because especially in B2B2C, which is what we are, business to customer, really it's about introductions, and it's building up a network or an ecosystem where you can get referrals within that ecosystem. So that's number one for us. You can't deny the power of social media. LinkedIn, for me, I have time blocked off each week where I'm making sure that what I'm building in social media and LinkedIn is going to be connecting me to potential customers. And then nurturing that over time and building that. And then another tactic we're doing, for example, in that
we got to sorry,
Yeah.
we got to take a quick break. We're a little bit over.
Yeah, of course.
We'll be right back. You listen to KHTS 1220, 98.1 FM. Welcome back. You listen to the Ask Brien Radio Show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM, and music's still going, and then it drowns out. Okay, Trace, go ahead.
I love live radio so much. Yes, so this conversation has been so compelling, and I truly wish we had a lot more time to continue it, because I know you have a lot more gems that you could drop for our audience today. But if they want to continue this conversation with you, Dr. Greg, what would be the best way for our audience to reach out and connect with you?
I think the easiest way would be go to clinexus.com. So that's CLINNEXUS.com, and you can submit through that, and it's really pretty straightforward, and that'll connect you with me.
That sounds great. Okay, everybody, if you want to play this episode back, which we all know you cannot do with live radio, but you can do with a podcast. So if you want to play this back, make notes, get in touch with Dr. Greg, get in touch with Producer Podcast, get in touch with Legal Steps, get in touch with Peter, although I'm not sure why you would want to do that, just kidding.
How about Legal Steps?
I did say Legal Steps. I said Legal Steps before Peter, but let's say it again, Legal Steps. With a Z. And you'll find a link in the show notes for that. But speaking of podcasts in all seriousness, we would love it if you would go to wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. That's Apple, that's Spotify, that's Google, that's iHeart. We're on all the platforms as the Ask Brien, and of course, that's AskBrien, the Ask Brien podcast. And download, follow, take a listen to our previous experts in our previous episodes, and give us one of those amazing reviews, 5 stars preferably, and let us know what you would like to hear more of on the podcast too. We'd love to hear from you.
Well,
Peter?
Thank you, Tracy. So, Doc, we have exactly 2 minutes left, and you're going to tell us the 3 most important traits of an entrepreneur.
Stamina, stamina, stamina.
Well, I was going to say tenacity, so we're pretty close.
Well, yeah, it's in there. It's in the ballpark.
So, okay, that's great. But even if you have stamina, even if you had tenacity, and you keep on trying something, you could be a hamster on a wheel. What differentiates a successful entrepreneur?
Yeah, a successful entrepreneur, you've got to be ready to adjust. You've got to be able to course correct, and you've got to be able to communicate that vision as you make those course corrections. So, communication is a critical piece as well.
And stamina, tenacity. And then the third one was what?
I was saying in the communication, you've got to be able to communicate your vision. You got stamina, and then you've got to be able to adjust. You got to be able to course correct.
And what do you think your best skill is?
Team building is certainly. I think it's the most valuable part for me, and I think if I've had any success, it's been my ability to build teams and create a cohesive vision and lead that team forward.
That's interesting because when I first met with my first VC, venture capitalist, the first thing they told me was, what are you going to do with your money? And I said, I'm going to hire people smarter than I am. And they all looked at me and said, good answer.
That's exactly right.
And that is part of team building.
Servant leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. And it shows that you're humble too, right? You realize that you're not the smart. You might be a very smart person, but that doesn't mean you're egotistical enough to not understand that. All right, unfortunately, we got to go. The show is over. Thank you very much, Doc. Thank you, Tracy. You'll see KHTS 1220, 98.1 FM, the Ask Brien Show. Over and out!